Oh, hey, there you are. Hey, audit friends and family, listen. Empathy is the golden child of soft skills, right? Everyone says be more empathetic. It'll make you a better leader. It'll make you a better friend. It'll make you a better auditor. But here's a little secret. Empathy isn't always the hero. Sometimes Sometimes it's the villain in disguise. And today, we're pulling back the curtain on empathy's dark side. Yep, it does have one. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to Audit Bites, the podcast that helps auditors become awesome. Join us for bite-sized info and education to excel in your auditing career.
All right, friends, welcome to Audit Bites, the podcast where we tackle the highs and lows and awkward in betweens of auditing. And we do it with a healthy dose of humor. I'm Robert Berry, your host, and today we are exploring 5 ways empathy can backfire. Yes, even for auditors. So here's what's on the agenda for today. First, we're going to talk about the hidden dangers of empathy. From burnout to bias, there are a lot of hidden dangers. Then we'll talk about, well, caring too much and how it can actually hurt your auditing. And then finally, we'll try to round it off with how in the world do you find the balance? How do you balance professionalism so that you don't lose your mind or your integrity? So by the end of this episode, you'll see empathy in a whole new light and you'll walk away with some actionable tips to keep it in check. So, are we ready to dive in? Before I dive in, let me go to my audience because Shelby is here from South Africa. Hey, wait, what time is it for you there? Isn't it like late? And Heather, I hope you, Heather, I was thinking about you the other day. I hope you're doing okay. Heather's my friend from Jacksonville. Heather, I don't know how long I've known you. It's been forever now that I'm thinking about it, and now I just feel old. But the hidden dangers of empathy and why caring too much can be a bad thing, and how do you find that balance? Now, what would an episode of Audit Bites be without story time? Okay, story time for you, and I want to see if anyone can relate to this. Clarence, my man, I got your email. I'm gonna give you a call. Hopefully today. I'm just swamped with a lot of stuff. Stay tuned, Clarence. I got a surprise coming in the middle of this episode. That's one of the things I've been busy working on. And man, you really gonna, dude, you're gonna freak out when you see this. Oh, okay, it's just 6:20. That's not too bad. Shelby says it's 6:20 in South Africa. Great to join. Great to see you here, by the way. If you really like this episode, pass it along to your friends. So, look, story time. Listen. So, early in my audit career, I was starting the audit department at this bank. Me and one other individual, we had left Deloitte, and we had this job to start an audit department at a bank. We were located at the corporate headquarters, and there was a branch right there on location, and it was a small branch. There was a branch manager and one other employee. And the branch manager would always talk about how she felt uncomfortable opening and closing the store by herself because she felt like there needed to be a segregation there because she didn't want money to come up missing and it be blamed on her. So we went in, we took a look at it, and of course, as auditors, that was our recommendation. But the company said, hey, it's a small branch. It only does X number of transactions per day, and it's just not worth the risk. So we were like, okay, it is what it is. So at one point, I go in to take a look at these operations, and we discovered that some money was coming up short. And it wasn't a whole lot, but it was consistently short over time. And then it would balance out. Then it would be short again over time. What we discovered was The branch manager was borrowing money. So she was stealing money and then she was paying it back. And she confessed to me and she was just like, look, I'm a single mom. Sometimes my paycheck is short, but I make it up the next month. And she gave me this huge sob story. And I'm listening to the sob story. And I grew up in a single parent household, so I could really feel what she was saying. I got it. I understood. Anybody else had a situation like that where a client had issues? They explained the issues to you and you could really relate and you could really understand the issues. And my man Hassam is here. While you guys can answer that, type that into the chat. If you can relate to that, I'll go back to the chat. Hassam says it's 7:20 p.m. where he is. Hassam, where are you? I can't remember. I forgot. It's hard trying to remember where everybody is. Oh, never mind. You put it in there. You're from Jordan, which is interesting. So look, sometimes as I'm producing the show, all the comments don't come up. I don't know why. So I have my little cheat sheet with me, which is my phone. So Hassam's comment about he's in Jordan showed up on my phone, but it didn't show up on my producer dashboard. So for those of you who don't know, yes, I am your auditor extraordinaire. Sorry, that was a joke. I'm your on-air talent as well as your producer behind the scenes. So I got my hands in a bunch of stuff and sometimes it just gets out of whack. So thank you for putting that in again. So he put it in again, Jordan. Hassam is in Jordan. I don't know why the first one didn't show up, but no, back to the question I asked. Have you ever like related to a client situation to where you started feeling sorry for them? So here's what I did. I started feeling sorry for her. Now, obviously, I wasn't going to not report it, but I remember talking to my boss about it, and I was like, "Hey, she's going through a tough time, and she did pay it back. So how do we handle this situation?" And I remember my boss looked at me and she said, "The same way we handle every other situation." And she was right, obviously. And we did handle it the way that we handle every other situation. But for one moment there, I so related to what she was saying that it took me out of the stringent, this is how we have to be as an auditor. Now, thankfully, I had the sense enough to not react on that emotion. But as auditors, we are human, aren't we? We aren't all just robots who go out there and strictly look at the numbers and that's it. We deal with people every day. And so with people comes some emotion, and with emotion comes all kinds of crazy stuff that, we sometimes don't want to deal with, but have to deal with. So has anybody else ever faced a situation like that? Hassam, you are too kind, my friend. He says, I am a role model. I'm just a guy who's passionate about auditing. Remind me to tell you guys at some point how auditing saved my life. Look, I love doing this because, like, what else would I be doing if not this? I don't know. I'm sure I'd be doing something, but And Quentin is here, and Quentin says, "Good morning to everyone." Good morning, Quentin. Hopefully you're doing well, my friend. Okay, so now I just told you all about a situation where I'm sitting here empathizing with the client. The client is actually stealing, but the client is a single mom, and sometimes money comes up short, but she was actually paying the money back. And you could see the transactions in the system. She would take from an account, and then about a week later, she would put the money back. Insane. Just really crazy. And so I went and asked my boss, what do we do about this situation? And she said the same thing we do with every other situation, right? So oh, Shelby says 100% agree. You're an on-air talent. Oh, just come on now. You're gonna make me blush up in here. So yeah, and she also says that the story is very relatable. You still don't know what action was taken against the cashier who did this in your cash count audit. Oh wow. I mean, and realistically, they obviously should have terminated that person. Obviously that's what should have had to have happened in that particular situation. And Hassam says we have to have a chat sometime in the near future, my friend. I'm a phone call away. I think you know my number because we're in a few WhatsApp groups together. If not, we'll connect. I'm not hard to find. I'm literally not hard to find because I'm everywhere. So now, with that story set up, let's talk today about 5 ways empathy can go wrong. You've probably seen my post for the last few weeks, and if you listened to the last episode, it was about the good side of empathy. But I wouldn't be doing you all a good service if I didn't bring up the bad side. By the way, here's a special surprise. Today's show is part 1 of a 2-part series. So the next episode is going to be another 5 ways empathy can go wrong. So we've got 2 parts there. Now, I'm not going to hold you guys any longer. We're just going to dive right into the first one. Let's start with empathetic distress. You see, the subject matter is so serious, I couldn't even say it. Empathetic distress. Let's start with that. This is what happens when you feel too much for others. You end up absorbing their stress and their struggles, and then before you know it, you burn out. Don't believe me? There's research to support this. Jessica Dose, an expert in compassion fatigue, explains it perfectly. She says that excessive empathy can lead to blurred boundaries and emotional exhaustion. She also talks about empathy extremes. For example, excessive empathy can then lead to a lack of empathy because you're doing it so much and then you're like, I'm doing all these things for all these people and no one appreciates me. And then you withdraw altogether. So sometimes too much empathy can turn into not enough. Or sometimes we don't have enough and people tell you, you're too rigid. You need to be more empathetic. And then that can turn into having too much of it. So either way, sometimes we hit the end of our empathy road and we just need a way to recharge. I'll give you an example. I once worked with an auditor who became so emotionally invested in his clients' challenges that he started to lose sleep. He'd lie awake at night worrying about, how findings would impact the client's overstretched team. And by the end of the engagement, he was so drained, and the audit actually suffered because of it. So, empathetic distress. Have you ever suffered from empathetic distress? What does that look like for you? Have you ever suffered from empathetic distress? And what does that look like for you? I just gave you an example earlier of how it almost got me, but thankfully I had a boss that kind of pulled me back into reality. But have you ever suffered from empathetic distress, and what did you do about it? Because if you have a problem with that right now, let's talk about some tangible takeaways and what can be helpful for you. Now, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. These are just a couple of helpful tips. If you are really stressed out, sitting in your bed late at night, tossing and turning, dreaming about audits, go seek some help. Because our jobs is very stressful. I know I come on here and I'm fairly lighthearted. Add a little bit of humor, a lot of seriousness, but our job is real stressful. Let's be really, really honest. So how can auditors deal with empathetic distress? Well, the first thing you need to do is set emotional boundaries, because if you let people, they will use you up and then throw you away. So sometimes after those emotionally charged meetings, take a 10-minute walk. Some people like to journal. Journaling is not my thing, but a walk does it for me every time. Remind me one day to tell you guys about the time I was in an audit meeting and they sat me at the head of the table. And when I sat down, the first first thing they said is they looked at me and they said, "Why do you hate us?" Fascinating story. Some people have heard it, but wild time. Whew. So go for a walk. Journal your thoughts. Put on your boxing gloves and go punch something. Notice I said something, not someone, right? So don't go telling people I told you to punch your audit clients, because that's not what I said at all. Not what I said at all. Now, Kay is here again. Hey, Kay. Kay is saying, I tend to wear empathy on my sleeves. I reach out to get help because empathetic stress is real and emotional. See, there you go. Oddly enough, I was having a conversation with a bunch of auditors the other day. We were chatting back and forth, and some of them seemed to believe that you could separate your logic from your emotion. And I was like, no. That's why we as auditors have issues with our audit clients, because we think that most people do that, because some of us do it because we're so logical. We are in the minority. That's not how life works. That's not how people work, most people. Some of us work like that, but we're in the strong minority. And they actually tried to argue with me on this point. I'm thinking, what? I'll tell you the example I used later on to kind of drive the point home. Anyway, Heather says, dreaming about audits. Heather, there are some people that do dream about audits. Well, I guess, is that really a dream or is that a nightmare? That's probably more so a nightmare if you're dreaming about audits, right? So, all right, let's talk about this. Set emotional boundaries if you're dealing with empathetic distress. It's the first thing you can do. Second thing you can do is practice emotional regulation. Look, and this is for people like Kate. Sometimes when people know that you wear your emotions on your sleeves, they will try to purposely push your buttons. There are some sadistic people who get off on crap like that. Or sometimes there are manipulative people who do it because they realize that it could change the subject, throw you off what you're auditing. So you have to use mindfulness techniques and things like that so that you don't internalize somebody else's stress or emotional manipulation tactics. I always say this, every good auditor needs to study psychology, because the bulk of our job is dealing with other people's unstable and sometimes irrational emotions. All right, so our first one is emotional distress. The second way, well, our second point, sorry, I lost my whole train of thought for a minute there. Our second point, as we're talking about empathy, how it can derail your audits, is over identification and loss of objectivity. You see, over-identification happens when you relate so deeply to a client's emotions that you just completely lose your objectivity. And for auditors, that's like a pilot losing their compass. That can be disastrous, but don't just take my word for it. They're supporting research for it. As a matter of fact, in Psychology Today, one of their contributors, Dr. Sean M. Byrne, highlights how empathy can cloud your judgment, especially for leaders. She gave an example. She's a college professor, and she gave this example of how her students would come to her and beg for better grades. They would tell her of the negative consequences that they could possibly face. You've heard the stories. I might get kicked out of school. My parents might kill me. I need a better grade. She actually said, now she studies this subject, and here's what she said. She said that it tempted her to help them, even though changing their grades would be unethical, among other problems that it could bring her. And think about that. That's like unhealthy helping. You think that you're helping someone, but it's very unhealthy. So she stressed the importance of setting boundaries, like I said previously. Now, if you have over-identification, what can you do? There are a few things you can do. How can auditors deal with over identification. The first thing you can do is focus on the facts, because facts don't care about your feelings. Let's just be honest about that. If we stay factually grounded, we can kind of pull ourselves off of the emotional ledge that we might be sitting on. So, look, we've got to anchor our decisions in data, not personal feelings. Now, the next thing that we can do is maintain professional distance. Now, I don't mean don't ever talk to your clients. I mean, I've been known to go out and have a lunch or two with a client. Heck, I've been invited to weddings and baby showers for clients before. So we got to maintain professional distance. Remind yourself that your role is to evaluate a process, not to shield your clients from reality. Again, your goal is to evaluate a process, not to shield your clients from reality. So if you've just joined us today, we are talking about empathy, and we're talking about the dark side of empathy, and we're talking about 5 ways empathy can derail your audits. And even though the number up there says 1, we're actually on number 2. But here's what we're going to do. Before I go any further, we're going to take a small commercial break. Uh-oh, wrong button. Oops. Before we go any further, we're going to take a small commercial break. All right, look, you hear auditors all the time talking about, we've got to be cutting edge. We've got to leverage technology. We've got to do these new and bright things. But are we really? Today, I want to introduce you to Audit Leverage. It is a platform built by auditors, well, me, one auditor, for auditors. And what it is an AI platform that helps us with planning, collaborating, communicating, root cause analysis, a whole bunch of stuff. Several different modules that help us out. And I like to build it as a productivity and learning tool simultaneously. And what I'm about to show you is just one of the wonderful modules within it. This one is the risk matrix. So suppose you're in financial services and you want to audit, I think this one is accounts payable. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Let me show you how quickly and easily you can identify the process, the risk, the controls, and some audit steps. We'll be right back. So let's take a look at Audit Leverage really quickly. Suppose you wanted to get a risk matrix for an area. You would go to our risk matrix model and you would simply type in the industry you work in. So in this case, financial services, and what you're looking for, which would be mortgage servicing in this instance. And with the click of a button, you have a risk and control matrix with your audit testing. This is just one powerful function within Audit Leverage. If you look to the side, you'll see that there are several other modules, approximately 14 or 15. So, Audit Leverage, helping you leverage AI to maximize your audit career. Now, here's what I want to know from you all. Is this something that you would be interested in? If so, go to auditleverage.net. You can test out some of the tools on the website. If you really, really like the product, tell your friends. Now, if you really, really like it, sign up for an annual subscription. For now, it's invite only, so you'll have to send me an email through the system. But within about 3 days, we're going to have the official launch of the Audit Leverage platform. So go to auditleverage.net and check it out. Heather, I really want to know what you think. I value your opinion. You always tell me just like it is. You've always been that way. Anyway, Audit Leverage, the system auditors have been waiting for. Now, as we continue our discussion about empathy and auditing and 5 ways that it can just totally derail your audit process, next up is unhealthy helping. I've already alluded to that a little bit. But here's where empathy gets really sneaky, because it makes you want to fix everything for everyone. And I imagine this is probably you, Kay, based on what you've said earlier, right? But here's the thing. Solving your client's problems as an auditor isn't your job. It's not your job. So listen, here's what psychologists have to say about this. They explain how empathy-driven rescuing often backfires. It enables harmful behaviors instead of addressing root causes. It's almost like when you fix everything for your kids and then they grow up to be delinquents and you wonder why. Well, because they never learned how to do much of anything because you fixed everything for them. I'll give you an example. I was working with this one junior auditor. They spent hours creating a detailed action plan for their client's issue. Why would they do that? You're probably wondering. Well, they had gone in and they understood the client's operations better than the client did. Now, it was well intended, but obviously it crossed the line into consulting, which could compromise our independence. So if you find yourself doing a bit of unhealthy helping, what can you do? How can auditors deal with unhealthy helping? Before I go there, let's go back to some of your comments in the audience. Oh, Kay is saying, when you've been where a client is and you've not yet addressed the distress in yourself, you will naturally go over and identify and lose your focus. Yeah. When you can relate to something that somebody else is going through, you can 100% lose your focus. Because now you're thinking about, oh, if I were in this situation, here's what I would do. Or I feel so bad that they're in this situation because I can understand and relate to them in their situation. So now, if you find yourself doing a bit of unhealthy helping, what can you do? Empower people instead of rescuing them, especially with your audit clients. Empower them instead of rescuing them. Here's the thing, too, and it took me a while to learn this professionally and personally. When you rescue people too often, they actually start to resent you, especially if they know that you're rescuing them, because they start to feel bad within themselves because they know it's something that they should be able to do, and they get mad at themselves. But oftentimes when you're angry at yourself, you end up projecting that onto other people. So empower your clients instead of rescuing them. The other thing you could do is know your role. It's not your role to be rescuing clients, to be writing up action plans for your clients. Now, you can collaborate with them while they complete their own action plans, but that's not our job to rescue clients. So if you've just joined us, we're talking about the dark side of empathy in auditing. We're giving you 5 reasons where empathy can just throw you off track. Right now, we're talking about unhealthy helping, which leads us to our next one, which is blurred boundaries. When empathy erodes boundaries, things get really, really messy. All of a sudden, you find yourself carrying emotional burdens that aren't yours to bear. You notice a pattern here. Regardless of which one of these elements we're talking about, the actual consequences on you are about the same. They bring you emotional baggage. And when you're carrying that baggage, eventually you're going to tire out and break down and burn out. Jessica Dulce highlights how blurred boundaries can lead to emotional overload on her website. She says that if we are excessively empathetic, it'll feel like our system is being totally overwhelmed by what's happening around us. Now, I once worked with an auditor who avoided reporting a finding because they didn't want to stress out a struggling department. And this ended up backfiring months later when the issue escalated and somebody actually committed fraud based on what that auditor had found, but delayed reporting. So when our boundaries are blurry, it actually prevents us from doing our job. So now that begs the question, what in the world can auditors do to deal with blurry boundaries? What in the world can auditors do to deal with blurry boundaries? Let me ask you all, have you ever Have you ever had to deal with blurry boundaries? Has this ever been a problem for you? Now we're talking professionally here. Obviously, personally, if you say you've never dealt with this, you're lying. But professionally, have you ever dealt with blurry boundaries? And if so, how'd you deal with it? How'd you deal with it? Shamin says, great meeting, nice meeting. Thank you, Shamin. This is a podcast. It's called the Audit Bites podcast. Go on your favorite podcasting platforms, whether that's Apple, Stitcher, any of the ones you listen to, or on YouTube. If you really like it, tell your friends about it. Get them to listen in. Matter of fact, tell them to go over to the App Store and write a good review. Tell them to go over to the App Store and write a good review. So, how can auditors deal with blurry boundaries? First thing you got to do is set clear expectations. Tell the client, this is not my job. Or tell your boss, this is not my job. Better yet, tell them this is crossing a line and explain to them what line is being crossed. Because I take that back. Don't say this is not my job. I hate it when people say that. It oversimplifies the issue. But what you want to do is tell people what's wrong with what's happening right now, why it's wrong, and what you are going to do to fix it. In other words, you're going to set a boundary with them. Yeah. Yeah. So Kay is hitting the point too. Blurred boundaries is difficult when you become friends with someone who was once your client. That can be a huge issue, and it's very detrimental because suppose you find something that gets your friend in trouble. Now what happens? I worked for one organization where a lot of the members of the management team were friends, and when I started to find stuff, they pointed the finger at us as an audit team for finding stuff because they got upset because it made their friends look bad. But it's not personal. There's some personal elements to what we do, but it as a whole is not personal. So we have to learn how to deal with those personal elements within it as well. Okay, so set clear expectations. What's the next thing you can do is reflect on your own decisions. Now, if you missed the beginning, shame on you for coming in late. No, I'm just kidding. if you missed the beginning, go back and listen where I told the story about how we were auditing tellers at a bank, and I found that one teller was borrowing money. She was stealing, but she was also paying it back. And she talked about how she had a kid to support and money would come up short sometimes. And I was just like, oh no. I grew up in a single parent household, so I really could relate to that. And if you missed what I said earlier, I asked my boss, how do we handle this situation? And my boss was like, how we handle every other situation. Just because you can relate to this person doesn't mean that the situation should be handled much differently. So we always have to reflect on our decisions. And if we made a good decision, continue those behaviors. If we made a bad decision, try and correct that going forward. And don't beat yourself up too bad because we're all human. And so we all have these times where sometimes we think about things in a different way and we lose sight of our judgment. But as long as we come back to it, then I think that's really a healthy way to go. So yeah, Kay says boundaries are necessary to protect yourself as well as your client and you know, maybe your employer if you're employed. Yeah, always, always. So now, if you're just joining us, we were talking about the dark side of empathy, 5 ways empathy can actually harm your audit instead of helping. And I think we're on number 5 now. I think. Let me just take a look here and see where I am. Yeah. So we're talking about 5 ways empathy can go wrong in auditing. And we are on the 5th one. And the 5th one is empathy-induced bias, which all of these kind of meld together at some point, right? So finally, let's talk about empathy-induced bias. And if you missed what I said earlier, this is part 1 of a 2-part episode. So we've got 5 today. In the next episode, we'll have 5 again. So, what is this? This happens when empathy makes us favor certain people or certain issues, leading to unfair outcomes. Now, let me get real serious for a moment and give a really good example of this. If you follow the news, you'll see that you remember that in the States a few weeks ago, someone came in and committed a serious crime. They murdered the CEO of a large healthcare organization. They found the person, arrested him. And the internet really interneted. Some people were saying he shouldn't be in jail because the corporations are corrupt. And I'm thinking, okay, those two things are separate. Healthcare companies, that one in particular, did some horrible things using AI in order to deny health claims. However, there's a person here who's dead. Like, those two things don't go together. Are you kidding me? But that is what some people said. That is where empathy induced bias comes into play. Now, I was having a discussion with some auditors about this, and some, again, I said earlier, thought that you could separate your logic and reason and judgment from the emotion. And I had to point out, you may be able to, but you're in a minority. Most people react emotionally to most things. Forbes actually had a good article pointing out how empathy can create favoritism, not just in people, but also in processes, in our beliefs, and our values. So in that article, they talked about three types of empathy: cognitive, emotional, and compassionate. Cognitive empathy is when you put yourself in another person's shoes so much that you understand their predicament, but you don't actually feel anything on an emotional level. So you can understand it logically, but you don't feel anything on an emotional level. Now, next, after cognitive empathy, is emotional empathy. And this is when you actually do feel it. You feel it in your chest, in your own body, the emotions another person is experiencing. And then lastly, there's compassionate empathy. Now, this combines both cognitive and emotional empathy. You can understand the other person's predicament, you can feel what they feel, but then you go a step further and you act in order to help the person out. Now, here's what else the Forbes column said. The first two forms of empathy can obstruct a leader. If you are merely cognitively empathetic, you will miss out and you will be emotionally distant. While you might understand someone's predicament, you don't emotionally experience what they're going through, and therefore you may not truly connect with them. Now, on the other hand, if you are emotionally empathetic, you run the risk of sinking too far into someone else's life. You feel what they feel, their burdens or your burdens, and now you are in a wreck of an emotional state. This also doesn't serve a leader who needs to be of clear mind and make unbiased decisions, which is why you want to have the third one, where you can understand it rationally, feel it emotionally, and make a sound, logical, rational decision. I once worked with an auditor who would sometimes not audit certain areas because the manager in charge of those areas were his friends, and those managers told him how stressed out they were and how stressed out they would be if he started an audit. Now, do we do that sometimes for clients? Yes, we take into consideration their schedule, their workload, but when it's done just for favoritism, and when it's done multiple times, over and over again, well, we might be a little bit compromised. So the question becomes, how can auditors deal with empathy induced bias? There are a few things. Prioritize based on risk, not relationships. Prioritize what and how you audit based on risk, not relationships. The next thing you can do is check your own bias. Notice that was in here twice because I said that previously. In order for us to be the best that we can be as auditors, we have to constantly question if we're doing the right thing based on the facts that are in front of us. Because we're not perfect. We make mistakes. We have to constantly ask ourselves, are we doing the right thing here? Not just are we doing the right thing, but how do we know we're doing the right thing? And that's going to be based on our facts, data, statistics, and reading the room. So, Kay says it sounds like the teller created her own banking system. If you missed the story I told earlier, that's exactly what was happening, Kay. She was borrowing money and then paying it back. So if you're just joining us on this episode of Audit Bites, shame on you. We were talking about 5 ways that empathy can go wrong. So let's recap a little bit. Empathy is kind of like salt, right? Use it wisely and it enhances your work. Kind of like how salt enhances the food. But if you overdo it, anybody ever had a meal that was just too salty? If you overdo it, it ruins everything. So by setting boundaries, staying objective, focusing on facts, you can harness empathy as a strength without letting it derail your audits. Now, I want you to remember, empathy isn't about fixing everything or pleasing everyone. That's pretty dangerous. It's about understanding and collaborating while staying true to your role as being an objective assurance provider. Use it wisely, and it's your greatest asset, my friend. So let me just say, if you found this episode helpful, share it with a colleague. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go and follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn. Check out my website, thatauditguy.com. We're in the middle of redoing that. And if you missed the previous section where I showed you about the first AI platform that helps auditors be more productive while also teaching at the same time, check out auditleverage.net. Auditleverage.net. Now, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. How do you balance empathy with professionalism? I'd love to hear your thoughts. This has been Audit Bites, episode number, that should say 69. Episode number 69. I am Robert Berry, reminding you that empathy, when used wisely, is a tool for growth. We'll see you next time, my friends.
Thank you for watching this episode of Audit Bites. If you receive value from this podcast, do us a favor. First, tell other auditors. Second, give us a 5-star review. And finally, talk to Robert about training your auditors. Our contact information is on our website, www.thatauditguy.com. It's also where you will find our course catalog, on-demand courses, a kick-butt blog, other podcasts, Robert's best-selling books, and last but not least, audit merch. That's right, we have audit hats, shirts, mugs, and more. Thanks for watching and listening. See you next episode.